Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. How's everyone doing today? Hi, Sunny. How are you? Good. I'm glad to hear that. Oh, that's good. I'm glad. I was working on these last night and I was thinking, oh, I hope they're going to like them. So, I cannot remember who requested the kind of like looking up through the trees type of a painting. Was that you, Sunny? I remembered it was somebody, but I'm having a hard time remembering who. Oh, good. Well, I'm glad. I'm glad I finally got around to it. While we're waiting for everybody else to join, you guys can actually vote. We will work on 2 of these little paintings. So I've got 3 options here, and you guys can choose. And we can also customize them a little bit. So if you wanted a slightly different view, the 3 options that I kind of came up with are, I've got the circle of trees here with kind of like clouds and things. I did also do, instead of a circle of trees, if we wanted to do something a little different, if we want to do a little bit of some northern lights with some kind of shadowy forest, or we can do a sunset circle of trees. And then we can mix and match things. So if you guys wanted to do like clouds with the evergreen trees, or you wanted to do like a starry night on one of these, we can do that too. The top and the bottom one. Okay. I'm gonna make a little kind of tally here. Got another one for the top. You know, and it would probably be a good idea, yeah, to do top and bottom because we'd be talking about slightly different things with perspective. All right, cool. Well, we have kind of decided I do need to grab a different notebook so that we can actually see the different ones because we'll probably need to refer to these a little bit. I guess we'll grab this little notebook that I made with the more of that using a different canvas kind of a thing. If you are brand new to my classes, you're going to need to grab some paper. We usually work on about 2 paintings or a little bit more. You'll need whatever watercolors you have. And then for today's class, if you have it, a flat brush would also be good for pre-wetting, but you can absolutely do the same thing with just a normal round brush, but this can kind of help speed some things up. All right, so what do we want to start with? Do we want to start with the sunset, or do you want to start with kind of the foggy night northern light forest? Start with the northern lights? All right, let's start with that one. I'm going to section off my paper, and I'm actually just going to work on both of these on this one page. I'm hoping that this isn't going to be too kind of warped over one side, but we'll see. So I'm going to go ahead and tape off little boundaries so we can work on both of them on this page. You don't have to tape off if you don't want to. So there is a question here about, can I explain perspective a little bit? And The answer is kind of. This is not necessarily my forte, but I can do my best. When you are thinking about perspective, the very obvious part of this is that things that are further away are going to be smaller, and things that are closer are going to be larger in frame. So, what you typically want to do is pick a point as kind of your vanishing point, which means it's kind of the point where your eyes are focused and the last kind of clear point of where you're going to be seeing some of the things within that visual range. So let me finish this, and then I'm going to grab those paintings again and I will kind of discuss it here. So when we're looking at a painting, we can actually look at both of these. The vanishing point of these two are going to be very different, and also the perspective you're looking at them. So this one is meant to be, and I know we're going to do it on this, but the same lessons apply to this one here. And since I can see both of these in frame, it's easier for me to talk about this here. So if we were looking straight up at something, our vanishing point would be here. And then when we're thinking about a painting, the borders are going to kind of be the things that are closest to us, at least within this framework where our center point is the thing that is closest to us. Now down here, if we were thinking about our vanishing point, it would kind of be here. And so we're closest to this bottom border because we're kind of oriented like we're looking at it like this, straight on. Whereas this one, we're looking at it straight up. And so one of the things you can do as like a easy little kind of exercise to think about these two is we just need to think about, let's say we have a composition here and our vanishing point is here, and then everywhere around it is our closest. So everything's going to radiate from it, and it's going to get larger as it comes closer to the edges. So you can actually do this with, sometimes people use string and things. Like I still remember, I think it was in like first or second grade, was one of the best times that I actually saw this demonstrated. This is where you take the string and you actually kind of put a point at your vanishing point, and then you can drag the string around to kind of actually get an idea for how things are going to fall, and then also how much larger they're going to be. This one is a little bit harder because we have multiple points of where we're actually kind of looking at this. Whereas this one, what we can say is, here's our vanishing point, and we could put a horizon line here, and then we can actually kind of make it go bigger this way and this way, kind of a thing. So I feel like I need to do a little more research and actually kind of re-look up that exercise, and maybe I can make a video about that specifically. But in general, what you want to think about is, here's my vanishing point, and so if I determine that something here is going to be this big, once it gets much closer to me, it's going to be about this big. So like this tree is kind of meant to be coming out of frame, kind of a thing. And then you want to keep things a little bit in scale. Now, something like trees are a great way to kind of practice some of this because they're pretty forgiving. You look in nature, and some trees that even though they're further away, they might be higher up, and they might also be larger because trees are not one single size. So this is a great way to kind of practice this. You can kind of do it a little bit more towards the interpretive side so that you're not going to, it's not like a building or something like that where things need to be a little more perfect. You just saw the watercolor graphite. Yeah, it is so cool. It is so different. I made a few follow-up videos based on a few questions that were in the comments, so you'll be seeing a little bit more. All right, so let's actually go back to kind of thinking about this one. And when I'm painting, sometimes I come up with a plan. Like sometimes I will kind of say I want there to be a path here. But in full disclosure, when I was actually painting this one, it just kind of naturally occurred where when I was initially painting, there was some separation here. And I thought, okay, let's kind of lean into that where we can kind of pick this as a vanishing point kind of a thing. So sometimes the painting's going to almost tell you a little bit more about what you need. but we can kind of start with this intentionally a little bit more. All right, so let's grab this, and I'm going to paint this one on the top. So for this, I'm just going to be primarily using this palette here today. This is my palette. Whatever palette you have is totally fine. You just want to, you're going to want a really nice bright green for this one, like a lemon yellow or a lime green kind of a color. If you don't have that, because we do want the brightness for the Northern Lights, you might want to switch over to something brighter like a yellow, but that's going to be a little risky with blues, so maybe something like a pink would work pretty well for this too. So if you don't have a bright green, maybe switch over to a pink if you have one. If you are working with dried watercolors, don't forget to wet your palette while we're kind of prepping some of this so that it can sit and kind of get ready for us to actually use. And the other thing I'm going to point out here is the ones that I'm going to be painting today are going to turn out a little bit differently because of the nature of the paper I'm using. This is 100% cotton paper here, and this is a cellulose paper. So actually, let me let you guys vote on this. Would you rather I paint this on this cellulose paper, which will have some slightly different effects, or do you want me to go grab a piece of Arches and paint on cotton paper so that we have similar effects? What are you guys using so that I can kind of paint on something similar to you guys? Yes, I do indeed. If TikTok saves them, I download them and upload them to my YouTube. All right, I got 1 vote for cellulose, 1 vote for cotton, 2 for cellulose, 2 for cotton, 3 for cellulose, 4 for cellulose. Okay, so let's do this. This is actually Canson paper too, so that's perfect. This is a little sketchbook I made with Canson. So in general, my observations on the difference between using a cotton paper and a cellulose paper, which if you're using one or the other, you're going to see some slightly different effects. The cotton paper takes longer to dry, which means you do have more workable time. But we can get some different effects on this, so we can actually go a little bit faster. We can also lift more. I find you can lift more from cellulose paper. The only thing that's kind of a real downfall in some of these paintings, it's actually really a nice thing in certain other ones, is that the cellulose paper, it allows you to get things like blooms and backgrounds a little more easily than the cotton paper. So we might actually see some of that start to develop today. And if it happens to you, and I'm sure it'll happen to me, we're just going to need to kind of adapt and see what the painting wants to do. All right, so let's start up by mixing a couple colors up here. I want to mix up a really dark blue, maybe kind of a purpley blue, and then a really bright green color. And I don't have a ton of, there's some greenish in this one, and there's some bright green in this one. I could clean these out, but there's not enough green in this with how dark I want to make this other color for it to really impact it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just use this as the base for my super dark blue color. You can do your dark blue however you want, but I'm going to talk through how I mix mine up. And you might have different opinions on how you mix this color up, but this is what I'm going to do. So I've started with kind of whatever is in there because it's just some pigment, and since I want a dark color, it's not going to really affect it. But I'm going to start by grabbing some of this blue raspberry and mixing this in, and I might actually need to put a little more water in my pans. I'm going to really mix that into that color that was sitting there. Then I'm going to grab some of that blueberry muffin, which is kind of like a navy-ish color, and mix that in. Oops, I'm spilling over just a little bit. I don't want to contaminate this color too much. So I'm just going to suck up a little bit of that. Then I'm going to grab a little tester strip just so I can keep track of the color and kind of what it is. Beautiful color, not quite what I'm wanting though. I think I want a little more of that blue raspberry. Or sorry, blueberry muffin. because this is a little more teal than I was hoping for it to be. That's a little closer. The other thing I personally want to do is I want to darken this color while also kind of muting it so it's not so like blue. And so I'm actually going to take the complementary color now, which is orange. I'm going to mix that in, which is going to kind of have a slight darkening effect. It's going to make it a little more gray. And I'm just going to mix that in. So it gets a little more steely. And then I'm going to play with adding in a little bit more of this blueberry muffin. And then maybe a little more of that orange color. Because I just want a little more pigmentation. There, that's a nice steely color. The next one I'm going to do is I'm just going to put in a decent amount of this yellow-green color. This is Key Lime Pie in my palette. I just want a nice bright color. And that'll be perfect. And then this one over here, I'm just going to modify to make sure that it is kind of it's another dark blue, but maybe it leans a little more towards the purple side. I just like to have a little variation between the colors so that it doesn't look quite as flat. You could do this tutorial with just these two colors here if you don't have enough wells or you just don't feel like mixing up another color. That's totally fine. So on this one, I'm going to lean towards adding more of that blueberry muffin, and then also some of this grape jelly or a purple or violet type color. I just want this to be a slightly warmer blue. And so I need a little more pigment there, so I'm going to grab more of both of those two colors and mix them in. And let's just double check. Close, 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 but not quite there. Maybe one more of this grape jelly. There we go. And that's a little closer. I was able to bring it a little more. I don't know how well you guys can actually... I feel like sometimes the camera doesn't quite show some of these colors as well in person, but there is a difference between those three. I just don't know how well it's going to show it. So, all right, let's get ready for this. We have our three colors. We're going to be painting the whole sky first, and I'm going to do this on this top one here. Let me make sure everything's in frame. And what I want to do first, especially since I'm going to be doing this, we want to kind of separate this area from the rest of it, is I'm going to place that part down first. So I'm going to wash my brush to make sure I don't have any more of that blue in it. And then I'm going to grab some of this bright green color, and let's just kind of carve out where we want that to be. And I'm going to put in a decent amount. Once I make that first mark, I'm actually going to kind of preload this with a bunch more color. We could even kind of come up and down if we wanted to kind of give it a little more shape. You don't have to. And then I'm just going to come in, and especially on these bottom parts, I'm just going to kind of pull them down using that darker color. We might need to do a couple coats on this, and that's totally fine. To get it right, if you want to have a little more separation between these two colors, I just put a little water in my brush, and then I can kind of soften on the top, maybe add in a little of that other blue color here. And now we just want to kind of fill in this whole area. I am working right now wet on dry. Because of the cellulose paper, you could maybe do wet on wet if you were working on more of a cotton paper, but right now this is what's going to work kind of for me. I'm holding this at an angle too, so that as I put on quite a bit of this pigment, it's going to kind of run down, which is also going to kind of help with some of the effects of those kind of northern lights look. And we can play with some of the shapes too as we're doing this. If you're like me and you're starting to get a little bit too much mixing here, I'm going to come in and I'm just going to kind of lift out some of that. And I'm going to place in some more of that bright green color. I'm just kind of trying to get some of the motion, like, you know how the northern lights kind of flick upwards? I've got a little too much separation here. Put in a little water. And let's just add in a little bit more here and here. Now, what I'm doing right now is I am risking overworking this area too much because certain parts are starting to dry. So what I need to do now is, even though this isn't quite how I want it to look, I need to just pause. I need to stop and I need to just walk away and then do the rest of this kind of in another layer. Saying that, I'm also going to lift a little of this out. Okay, so I'm gonna wait. It's not perfect, and you can also see how I am getting some of those backgrounds. Now, because this is that cellulose paper, you don't really get the backgrounds so much or the blooms on that cotton paper, and it can be a little troublesome. Like, I'm not super happy about the backgrounds that are forming here, here, or here. However, I like the ones that are kind of forming within this because it has given it a little more kind of dimension and texture that is lacking in the other one. So sometimes you're going to have a good and a bad effect at the same time using a slightly different type of paper. Yes, the lifting out is done with just a clean, damp brush. There's also a request for me to slow down, and I appreciate the sentiment, but we do, like, if I were to slow down some of these things, because of the nature of the paper as it dries, different things are going to happen. I will be demonstrating this again on a dry layer so that you can kind of get another idea of it. So we'll have a second go at this. And I know that's one frustrating thing about like watercolor tutorials is you really want people to kind of slow down. But it is one thing you're going to need to kind of start to see is the speed that some of this happens. So one thing I can say to kind of suggest is perhaps when you're taking a class like this, you don't need to copy exactly what I'm doing. If your paint isn't doing exactly the same thing, it's not moving in the same way, don't spend time trying to correct it to make the exact same shape that I'm making. Instead, just focus on kind of trying to take some of the same principles where you fill up certain areas at kind of the same speed, because that's where you're really going to, like, I see everybody's going to paint at different speeds when they get started. Some people are going to paint a lot faster and some people are going to paint slower. And that's totally fine. But you are going to start to have different effects. And that's where I see people say like, well, mine doesn't look like yours. And if you're painting a lot slower or a lot faster, the water is going to soak in and move at different rates, and it's going to actually have different effects. So anyways, yes, I will try to slow down as much as I can, but if I don't completely slow down in a certain part, that is because of those reasons. So I hope that kind of helps with a little bit of context. Sometimes you got to kind of focus on the timing of things. All right, so while we're waiting for this one to dry, if you are impatient or you're worried about smudging this or something, you can use a hairdryer. Typically, we paint a couple things on my lives for a few reasons. One, it gives us a couple chances to have success on something, and we can demonstrate some slightly different techniques. And the other reason is that generally, and I know I have broken this rule a few times, but I do typically try to not use the hairdryer just because I don't want it to be loud. Like, my goal with these lives is for this to be kind of a relaxing time where we get to just disconnect from everything, and having the hairdryer doesn't feel that relaxing to me. Okay, so while we're waiting to move on, and we're going to move on this, I'm going to let you guys vote again. We're going to do the sunset on this one. In my little notebook here, this was done with my palette if you like those similar colors, but I can also switch over to another palette. I could use something like Koi or Culture Hustle. I hesitate to say that I would use Winsor Newton on this because my Winsor Newton set does not have a really nice vibrant pink in it, and that will kind of ruin some of the effects. I also would not recommend doing Viviva on this one because we need to layer. In Viviva, you can layer, but there are some weird things that happen with it. So this would be a better more watercolor specific one. But I can also just do it with the unicorn food. But if anybody wants me to switch over to one of those other palettes I just mentioned, let me know and we can do that. Did I tape off with washi tape? Yes. And then can you do more of a yellow, pink, and purple? Sure, yeah, we can make it more purpley. All right, unicorn food or koi. We've got 1 vote for koi and a few for unicorn food. All right, I think we're gonna stick with unicorn food. What I think about Stuart Simple, I think they've got some really fun supplies, and I actually like the watercolor set I got from them. Okay, so this one we are gonna do a little different. We started this one up here working wet on dry, which means we put wet paint onto dry paper. But this one we actually do want to pre-wet because we're gonna be working on a gradient, and we want to give ourselves the best chance of succeeding in order to make sure that we can actually get those kind of nice, smooth, concentric lines. So on this one, what we want to do is we actually want to pre-wet the whole thing. You can definitely do this with just a brush and some fresh water. This is the one other type of brush that I do recommend investing in other than something like this. I mean, use as many different watercolor brushes as you want if you like other ones. But if you're trying to keep it simple, I find that these two are really the only ones you need. This one is like something like a round brush that's a size 10 or 12. We'll do like 95, and then this one can be super handy just to help you kind of speed things up. So I'm going to take this wash brush and I'm just going to place some fresh water over this entire bottom square here. There is a question here about talking about different brands and my experiences with them. I do actually have quite a few different brands, and I'd be happy to do that. I feel like that would be, maybe that's what next week's class should be, is me just demonstrating a whole bunch of different, I have like 15 different palettes, and I can actually demonstrate all the different ones or something like that so that you guys can actually see the differences between them. All right, so we want to wet this, and I'm going to try to get a reflection here. We want it to be kind of shiny, but see how we can actually see the texture of the paper, and we don't have any standing water? That's kind of what you're looking for. By the time I finish talking about this, I might need to add in a little more because it's getting more mattified up here. But you're looking for shine that you can see the texture through. All right, I'm adding just a little bit more because I talked a little bit too much there. And let's get started. Well, so for this one, I am going to do something that's a little more unique for me. Usually I pre-mix some colors, but on this one, I'm actually going to be dipping straight into these colors. And I'm just going to be working kind of through a gradient, starting with my nice kind of purple color right here in the center. I'm just going to place a little bit of this here, and it's on wet paper, so it's going to kind of dilute itself. I'm just going to kind of work in a little circle there. Then I'm going to dip into the watermelon sugar, and I'm going to just kind of make a little circle around it. Because it's wet, we can wash our brush and then tap it off so it's just a little damp and we can kind of soften together. You could move back in to that purple color if you want it to be a little darker. If you don't, that's totally fine. I'm just kind of going in circles. Working wet on wet is more forgiving. It is also more unpredictable. I'm going to take, oops, that was a little bit too much of that watermelon sugar color. And let's even go straight over to this bubble gum, which is even more of a pink color. We don't need this to be perfect, and we can do another layer on this to make some adjustments. Now, I have a really dirty orange color, so I'm worried about actually dipping into that because it's going to kind of ruin the effect. So I'm going to go straight to some of this yellow color, and I'm going to actually kind of mix this right on the page to make it into a little bit more of an orange color. So I'm going to place that yellow down, then I'm going to take some of this pink, and I'm going to mix it right into there. And then I am going to soften between those two with kind of a damp brush. Got a couple bubbles. And then let's bring this out a little bit further. This one we might want to do a second layer just to get some more vibrancy in some of those colors. Got a little bit of a hole there. I'm going to kind of fill that. Maybe soak up just a little bit. And then I'm going to go straight into really kind of putting a bunch of this yellow down here. And in my next layer, I already know I want to do a second layer on this, but in my next layer, I'm going to bring the pink out a little bit more. And I'm also going to kind of emphasize more of that orange in between the two. Right now it just looks kind of psychedelic. But again, we want to wait, we want to kind of stop. If you have any standing water on your page, you want to suck that up so you don't get too many of those back runs. And you can also hold it at an angle to kind of control the direction that this is going to move a little bit more if that helps you. But the temptation is to go back in and continue to work on this, but I'm starting to get certain areas that are drying. And if I don't stop at this point and wait for it to dry, I'm going to have a lot of those effects that kind of look like this area up here. Thank you, Sunny. Thank you for helping. I really appreciate that. Okay, so what we need to do now is we need to make sure that this one is dry. There was a question earlier about how long is it going to take to dry. That depends on a ton of factors. What type of paper you're using. If you're using cotton, it's going to almost double the dry time because it really soaks in there. How much water you used, and then even something like the climate you're in. If you're in a really humid climate, it's going to take longer to dry than if you're in a less humid climate. Yours looks like an eye. Yeah, mine kind of, I could kind of see that. This one is going to, it's going to be better, one, when we add a second layer to get some more vibrancy, and two, it's going to be better once we actually add those trees in on the sides. You can use a hairdryer on it, yes. The only time you don't really want to use a hairdryer, well, there are a couple reasons why you might not use a hairdryer. And one is if you have standing water, so there's like a puddle, when you put the hairdryer on it, it's going to blow in all sorts of ways. And if it blows onto a dried area and then kind of sits there, you're going to get more of those back runs. The second reason why you might not reach for a hairdryer is there are slightly different effects if you actually let like a puddle sit and dry. If you're really trying to get kind of crisp outline edges and you're trying to get some of those really condensed back runs and things like that, they're actually going to be more spectacular if you let it happen naturally than if you try to force dry it with a hairdryer. But most of the time, it's not going to make much of a difference. Yeah, so we're kind of trying to do the Northern Lights here. There's a couple questions while I'm waiting for just another minute. I think this one is pretty much dry enough, but we're going to give it just another second. So when you are looking for a brush, I recommend getting a size 10 or 12 round brush, and it's a larger brush, but really all it means, because even on a smaller brush, like let's do a little experimenting, because if you get one with a really nice tip, you can make super fine, super thin marks with that nice tip. And let me see if I've got a smaller brush. I do. Here we go. This is a size 6 brush. It also has a nice tip on it. But the actual fine detail work is not going to be that much different on this size versus this size, because that tip of that brush is going to allow you to do a ton. And the main difference is this doesn't hold as much water, so you're more limited by using this smaller brush than if you use a slightly larger brush that can do a bunch more. Okay, so we're going to revisit this one, and I think we should do another. This one wouldn't be bad as it is. It is kind of actually pretty. Actually, you guys tell me. Do you want me to move on to the trees on this one, or do you want me to do a second layer on the Northern Lights so we have another shot at kind of fixing some things in this? Once I add the trees on, this could look kind of neat, but it could also use another layer. So you guys choose. All right, I'm seeing 50-50 between the two. I think another layer is just ahead now. Okay. Let's do the second layer. I think that one officially edged out. Okay. So again, when we are starting, when we want to have a really dark background, but we want a point of interest, one thing that I like to do is I usually start by laying down my lightest color because it kind of like reserves that space. And since we're putting it down, it'll soak in a little more. And then it reserves it so that it's not going to automatically mix as much with the other colors that we're going to put on. So let's start with that again. So I'm going to take this light green color, and I'm just going to kind of place it in those similar areas. Now, when I place this in here, notice that I'm going to drop in a bunch of extra water with that to make sure that it's going to kind of move with the rest of the painting. I don't want it to be dry. I want it to move. Then you can wash your brush, or you can go straight into something, another color, but I'm just going to then kind of soften and pull these down. Consider dipping into a couple of those colors if you mixed up more than one. Also consider just putting some water in your brush like what I just did in order to kind of soften between these two so that not quite as much of that dark color is going to be there. Then I can put a little more color here. And I'm also going to place more here. Again, I'm going to kind of soften with my brush because I don't want to completely ruin some of those top effects that are happening there. Soften there. Place in more of that color. Move it down the page. And I'm holding this at an angle, and that's going to help kind of encourage some of those drips. I already like this so much more. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to resist the urge to go back and fuss, because I'm tempted. There are some parts here that I'm really tempted to fuss with. But I think if I do that, I'm going to get some of those weird backgrounds and things like that that I had before. If you have backgrounds at the bottom of your page, it's not as big of a deal because we are going to cover those with trees. But if you have them near the top, they're going to be a little more visible. So I'm going to stop at this point. And I personally think this made this a lot more luminous, and I'm liking some of these effects that are happening here. I am going to lightly grab some of this water just to kind of limit the amount of background that's going to happen here. Okay, so let's wait on that. Yes, I like it. I like the second layer more than the first layer. I did like the first layer, but this definitely has a little more depth, and I got some really good parts, and then I didn't mess with it as much, and I think some of that is going to work out. So we can still see some of those backgrounds kind of behind, but it kind of feels more like clouds or something than just like errors within the paper. You can use a little bit of paper towel to suck up the extra water. the one thing I would caution about that, and here, I'll just do it for you now, is see with my brush, there's not a ton of water here, but with my brush I can be super light and I can be really precise. And a paper towel, even if I'm really careful, it's going to actually leave a little more texture because it wants to suck up even more water than what you kind of expect. So if you were going to try this, I would be real careful with this. The brush itself will work pretty well, but you can absolutely. So there is a comment that says, mine is so bad. I understand that feeling, but bear with me here because at each stage of these little paintings, they are going to get better. And what if you're feeling like, ugh, I really hate mine? You have a bunch of options. You don't have to move on at the same pace we're moving on. You could choose to wait and then do a third layer on top. Also, if while you were working on your first layer, you noticed you got a bunch of brush strokes or you got a bunch of disturbing the under layer, try using a lighter touch with your brush because if you really drag it through, you can lift some of the previous layer as you lay down color on top. My next comment, though, is you might want to continue moving on with this, but take a look at what is happening in your painting because more than likely, even if you're thinking, mine is so bad, more than likely not all of it is not what you want. You might start to look and say, wow, I really like this area here, or I really like over here. And when we add in our layers that kind of come closer in the foreground, you can make decisions that are going to help to hide and then highlight certain areas. So on this one, I didn't really have any problem spots necessarily, but let's say theoretically I had a bad area here. That would have been why I actually chose to put some of those trees over that area. And then if I actually kind of make them go down further, it brings the eye to focus and it frames the areas that you do like. So think about adding elements that are going to hide or highlight. There's a question about, do I ever use watercolor pencils? And the answer is not really. I have some. I've had them for years, and I don't think I've ever had to resharpen any of them because I just don't use them. I sometimes use watercolor markers. I like those. But something about the pencils. I don't know. I've never been that into colored pencils. If you like colored pencils, they would probably be a good option for you. But that's just one of those mediums that I don't know, never really resonated with me. It's your first time joining. We start at, it's 11 a.m. Mountain Time. I'm located in Colorado, so it's based around that. I think that's 1 Eastern and 10 Pacific. All right, so we're letting this one dry before we add in the trees. We need to come back and do a second layer on this one. I'm gonna take a risk. If you're not sure if yours is dry, don't do this, because if you touch it and some of it comes up, you're going to have those marks in there. Sometimes I take risks on some of these paintings for a few reasons. One, because I want to be sure. And two, if it messes things up, you guys can kind of see how I compensate for mistakes, because more than likely at some point you're going to do the same. I think I've lost some of the comments. Hold on, let me go back. You're going to trust the process. Yes, trusting the process is sometimes the hardest. And yeah, this is a really good point. Somebody says, I feel that so often when I paint, but I go back later, it looks better. And yes, it is so true. Sometimes you get so involved in what you're doing and that it doesn't look exactly like what you were trying to, somebody was showing you how to paint. And so maybe in reference, not even saying like mine is better, but it's just not what you have created, basically, if you have slightly different shapes. And so you're like, oh, this shape isn't the same shape or whatever. You might, when you take a step back and then you don't have something else to directly compare it to, you might think, oh, actually, I really like this area. It's much better. So Let's see, what else are we saying here? Hold on, my iPad decided to flip up. I'm trying to look at the comments. Water brush is hard to work with. I have some of them. They can be hard to work with, but they're really good for things like flat washes and gradients. Yours looks like an erupting volcano. Ooh, lean into that. That could be so cool. Any tips for visiting Red Rocks? Oh, not really. I live quite a ways north from there. It's quite a trek for me to actually get to Red Rocks. I mean, it's a trek for pretty much anybody to get to Red Rocks, but it is a beautiful venue and it is really a fun place to go. So I hope you have a ton of fun. All right, I'm going to start by pre-wetting this one again. We're moving on to modifying our sunset with a second layer. This one definitely needs it. I've got way too much yellow on this. I want to darken some kind of up here, and I want to bring that down. I really only want the glow of the yellow. I want it to be more focused on the pink and the oranges, but I kind of want just the yellow to really be peeking out from these corners. So I'm going to go ahead and just wet. And if you are wetting on top of a dry layer that has a bunch of pigment like this, you want to lay the water on top. Be very gentle. If you really move that across the page, you're going to start to really disturb the layers underneath it. And you're going to get some brush strokes. So you kind of want to think about just like laying it on top, like you're frosting a cake almost. So this is the general reference for this bottom one, although there was a request instead of having blue in the center to make it more purpley. So that's what I'm trying to do on this other one, is make it more purple into the pinks and then the oranges. The drifted, oh, it does kind of look like a river. Yeah, I could totally see that. Also, you're obviously welcome to continue copying what I'm doing here, but if something in your painting is speaking to you and saying, I'm a volcano or I'm a river, don't be afraid to kind of listen to that and try to lean into that instinct. All right, so I'm working directly from these pans. First thing I am going to do, I'm letting this soak in a little bit, is I do need to clean out some of these wells, because I want to have access to that orange. So I'm just going to kind of swipe around in these and then wipe my brush off to make sure they're clean. And I'm going to re-wet my colors just to make sure that I have access to enough. So there's a question about should you be refreshing. I actually work with 2 cups. One is my dirty water. This one is my clean water. So this is where I wash my brush, and then this one stays nice and clean. All right, I've got a clean brush. I'm going to start with this purple in the center, and I'm going to bring it out a little bit more. This is on a wet page. I'm going to bring that out a little bit further than I did the previous time. Then I'm going to move into that, this is kind of a pinky or a magenta type color. I want to bring this out further because I want some of that yellow to go away, kind of combining the two a little bit. Moving into an even brighter, kind of closer but not quite to an opera color pink. Just kind of moving in a circle. This is on wet paper. If yours starts to dry, you need to either re-wet right away or you need to wait. Now I'm going to go in, I'm not even going to wash my brush as I move through some of these colors. I'm going to go into that orange color. This is that orange marmalade. Kind of a nice golden color, and soften as I go out. And then I'm going to do just a touch more of that kind of yellow, kind of trying to combine it a little bit into that orange. This does not need to be absolutely perfect. We're going to be painting a bunch of trees on top or potentially actually just drawing them with a pen. That's going to be another option I'm going to give you guys in a little bit. So we're going to be covering a lot of this. We just kind of want the feeling of that like sunset glow. This is risky, but I'm getting a little separation here. As this starts to dry, I probably shouldn't be touching here, but I'm going to try to put in a little more of that purple color. And then I'm going to let it sit. So we can see a couple things here. Let's talk a little bit while we're waiting for these to dry, the paper differences. Again, this is Canson XL 140 pound cotton or cold press paper. It is a cellulose or more like a wood type based paper. Whereas this one here is a cotton-based paper. So for things like gradients and some of these areas where you really want to work, you are going to get a more forgiving experience with cotton paper, but it does take a lot longer to dry and you can't lift out of it as well. So each kind of comes with their own unique benefits and downfalls. This also has 2 layers on it. This one only had 1, so I wouldn't judge the vibrancy. Can you paint with watercolor on canvas? Kind of. It doesn't really stick that well. You can stretch watercolor paper over a canvas frame though. And you can also apply something like a watercolor ground onto the canvas in order for it to do it. The main thing with if you try to paint it on a canvas, it's just not going to react in the same ways. It'll kind of stain some of the canvas, but not a lot of it. Anyone know the cheapest place to get Arches paper? Oh man. Yeah, Arches is pricey. I recently did buy a bunch of different cotton papers, by the way. I'm going to be testing them and I'm going to be doing some price comparisons on them so you guys can see a bunch of different options for other cotton types of paper. So gesso doesn't really work for watercolor necessarily. I mean, it kind of does. It's a little more absorbent than a canvas, but keep in mind, anytime I tell you guys you can or cannot do something, play by your own rules. If you feel like experimenting with something, try it. Maybe you can figure out a way to make it work within how you want to practice art. Strathmore, I believe Strathmore performs way more like Canson or even like Artist Loft, and so I think it is a cellulose-based paper. Let's see, hold on. While we're waiting for this to dry, let me go grab a pad and see if it says what it is. All right, so here is a thing of Strathmore paper. Now, in my testing, I think that this is cellulose. One of the things that you can really see is most watercolor papers, if they are cotton, they are going to advertise that. They will say, this is cotton. Like, let me grab another piece of cotton, something. Okay, here are 2 different types of cotton paper. You can see here, 100% cotton. This one is also here, 100% cotton. Arches says 100% cotton. So if you're looking down the watercolor aisle and you see something that's cold pressed and it's the right weight, but it doesn't say 100% cotton somewhere on it, it's probably a cellulose paper. It doesn't mean it's bad paper, it just means it's probably not cotton. Okay, so we are still waiting for both of these to dry a bit, but we can do a little preparation. We might go in with a pen too on some parts of it. On some of these, actually in the foreground ones where things are darker, this is another way to force perspective, is to use something called atmospheric perspective, where things that are further away are a little bit lighter, they're a little more out of focus, and then as things get closer to you, they are darker. Since we're painting to sunset, well, this is a nighttime and this is a sunset, that means it's low light. So the trees are going to be a more kind of gray or black type shadowy effect. And so as we get really close to the edge of our paintings, we can lean into just using something like a pen on top once everything is dry. Stretch a cotton t-shirt. So you could, that would be good for painting like acrylic or oil if you did a cotton t-shirt on a canvas, but it wouldn't, a cotton paper has different properties than a t-shirt that will allow you to paint watercolor on it better. That being said, maybe it would have really cool abstract effects or something like that. All right, I'm going to set these to the side for just a moment. We're going to be mixing up a kind of dark color. And if you have a black in your set, this is the time to use that black. Now this set does not have a black in it. It has just all the bright, vibrant colors, but we can easily mix up a black color. I'm going to wipe out this middle one because I'm done with that bright green color. And that's going to be the easiest to clean out. In this set, but also if you have a different set, I find the easiest way to make a dark gray color is to mix the equivalent of something like a phthalo blue, which is a slightly green leaning blue, and then a vermilion color, which is a red leaning orange. In this set, it is blue raspberry and marmalade. So I'm just going to place a little water in this well here. I'm going to mix up a dark color. Starting off with that blue raspberry color here, and here I'll grab a tester strip so we can kind of watch this go through the stages. I'm going to add in a little bit more because we want this to be pretty saturated. So we're starting here with just blue. That's a lot of that. I'm going to try to put some of that back in. Maybe even just a little bit more. Then I'm going to go in and I'm going to wash my brush, but I'm also going to tap it dry off camera so that I'm not introducing more water because I want just to be saturated. Then I'm going to take some of this orange color, which if we saw on its own, it looks like that. But when we mix it into this blue color, the brightness points on both of those colors are going to be kind of canceled out, and it's going to make us a nice gray or dark color. Question is, if we have black, are we using only black or mixing color into it? That's really up to you. In this, I used this mixture here. A Payne's Gray would be really nice for this too. You could lean into whatever colors are kind of in the sky that you really want to concentrate on. So maybe adding a little blue or a little purple into it could help it kind of pop out. But either is fine. If you want to keep it simple, black will work great too. So starting with this color here, we are going to be working on that Aurora next. This is a pretty saturated color. And what we want to do is do a kind of first layer of trees kind of like way off in the distance. And we want them to be lighter than this. Now, when we layer on top, notice that we didn't really change the colors that we used in these paintings, but yet it really darkened them when we added a second layer in. So what we want to do is keep in mind that no matter what color we add on top, even if it's a really light color, it is going to just add some pigment to the page. So we actually want to make sure we've got a lighter version of that gray for those very, very back trees that you can kind of see like back over here. Okay, so I am going to suck up a little bit of this here. I don't need to take all of that because, again, it's a nice dark color. But I'm just going to put some water in here. And then I'm going to just swipe in here and take a little bit of that gray color, and I'm going to make a more diluted version of that. So a nice kind of light color. I've got a dark saturated color, and then I have a light color here. We are moving on to adding trees to our first painting, which is the kind of Aurora Borealis painting. You want yours to be dry before you start this next step, or it's going to really bleed into the sky. So if you need to, use a hairdryer at this point, but I think mine is good enough to go. So I'm going to start with this lighter gray color in my brush. And this is where I want you guys to take a look at what you're painting, and depending on kind of what's happening in it is where you might want to choose where your vanishing point is. Now, some of the things that are happening in mine is I don't particularly like right here, but I love here. So I want to kind of focus the attention. So I'm thinking I am going to put my vanishing point about here. So I'm going to have my trees kind of come here. I'm also going to have some in the distance here. That's going to help me cover this area, and it's also going to help me draw attention to some of these other areas. So I've got my nice light color, and for those very background trees, we don't need to actually kind of paint in the tops or anything. We just need to take the tip of a brush, a nice tip. If you've got too much in your brush, you can always just kind of tap it off. And I'm just going to kind of hint to kind of the texture of some trees here. We don't need to do anything super specific, but it's just kind of like, oh yeah, maybe there are some trees in the background. Same thing's going to go for over here. And this is actually over in this, see how it stands out over here but not over there? I am going to grab a slightly darker color for over here to do this too, just so it does actually kind of show up. And then for both of these, I'm just going to take some clean water and just kind of soften down towards the bottom. Does not need to be perfect, because we're going to be adding some more layers. We just kind of want to soften the edges so that we don't see some of those really defined edges. At this point too, while things are wet, since we need to wait a little bit anyways, we can kind of start to lift out. If we wanted to have a little road, it's going to be a lot thinner at the vanishing point, and it's going to get a lot thicker as it comes towards you. So you could actually take a second to kind of lift some of that out. And then notice that as I did this, I kind of tried to mimic the line this would have made, just to kind of make that composition a little more interesting, at least in my opinion. Get overzealous with pigment, have to practice. Yeah, there are some things that you do need to learn restraint on with pigment, and there are other things where you can just go absolutely wild with the pigment. So that is a good thing to keep in mind when you are painting different things, how much pigment you should kind of have in either one of them. All right, so I want to talk about a couple things before we paint on either. We need to do another layer on this. It needs to dry. We need to do some trees on this. But let's give you guys an option, and I want to talk about a couple things. When we are thinking about the shadowy type figures that these trees would be casting. Now, I like this one, but one of the things that I like that I was thinking about after I painted this is at this time of night, think about when you are in a sunset scenario that's really golden and kind of starting to get darker towards the top. There's not a ton of light left that's really going to add highlights onto things. It's more like you're just going to be seeing the shadows that these trees are kind of casting or blocking the light, so they would actually be darker. And so if you are painting a darker thing like this, one of the downfalls of using watercolor as the trees or something is because it's still kind of a transparent medium. you're gonna really need to bump up that pigmentation, but it's still gonna just kind of have this feeling of there being some light that's let through. So we have a couple options. We can go this route, and I'm gonna let you guys choose, where we do a super dark green color that's almost kind of towards the black end of things for our trees, and we can paint them using a brush, or we can wait for everything to dry and we can use a pen and we can get some really dark saturation and we can draw our trees in that way. So you guys tell me what you want to do. Pen. Okay. I saw a couple pens, a couple paints, both. I think paint is winning out. All right, we're gonna do it with paint. On this one, more than likely, I will do the paint, and then in the very, very foreground, again, I will do that, the pen details, just so we can kind of see. All right, let me see. All right, what do you guys think? I want to avoid using the hairdryer, but I think both of these need quite a bit of drying before I can move on. Do you guys want me to use the hairdryer so we can move on, or do you want me to talk about something different while we wait? Okay, we're definitely doing paint. I'm seeing more and more come in for that. 1 vote for blow dryer, 2. All right. I'm going to be turning this on if anybody needs to mute, now is a good time to do it. I'll give you a little countdown from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okie dokie. Hair has been dried. Okay, so there was a quick question too about softening some of the orange or something like that. You could come in and try to kind of like lift out certain pigment by pre-wetting it a little bit, but then you're going to run the risk of getting more. You could do another layer, or you can just do clever tree placement. So, all right, we need to mix up a darker green color. I'm going to base it on this color. Before we do that, one thing, in case you guys already have a super dark kind of blackish green color, one thing I want you guys to practice is, if you have a round brush that's about this size, I want you to practice filling your brush up with some water, tapping it off so that you don't have too much that it's going to affect the tip. And then I want you to practice this stroke, where you're going to take the tip and barely touch, and then as you go, push and drag and make it thicker. You don't need to completely fill it in, but making kind of a nice even stroke that gets progressively thicker the further you drag is going to help us get some of that perspective. So if you have your color mixed up, that's a good thing for you to practice real quick on some like little sketch paper or something. I'm just going to be cannibalizing this color here, so I'm just going to pack in some of this green into this is already kind of a bluish purpley color, which is going to kind of help the case to make it a little darker. I need another little tester strip. That is a pretty nice color. I do want it to be a little darker, so I'm going to grab a little more of that blue. I want it to be a little more of a cooler green. And then if I want to darken this, I can use that same principle of those complementary colors. And I can take a little bit of this red. I don't want too much, but I want some. And I'm just trying to make sure I get mainly pigment in my brush and not any water to kind of water this down. And there, it's a green, but it has more kind of gray, or it's a gray, dark gray with kind of green tones. Okay, so we are ready to go with starting our trees on this one here. What we're gonna do is, actually, since I dried both of these, let's go back in and let's add some more trees on this one here so that it can dry while we're painting our trees on this, because this will be our final step on this one. And so while we're working on this, our second layer of trees can actually dry on this one here, and then we can go back and finish it with pen when we're done. So I'm gonna take that gray, that darker gray color that I mixed up first before I then kind of thinned it in order to get a lighter color for those very far away trees. And on these ones, you can kind of change the direction that these are going. So maybe these kind of come up before coming down, but we want them to get a little bit smaller as they get closer to this vanishing point. And you could do the same thing where you just touch the tips like this, just to make those kind of top shapes, or if you wanted to, you can kind of come in and predefine and just tap down if you wanted to add some more shape to at least some of them. You want these to be a little bit bigger, not necessarily taller, but by coming in and adding a little of this texture, it's going to make them appear like they're closer to you, because you can actually see some of the texture. Don't overthink this part too much. Just kind of tap and allude to some of these. Because think about when you're looking at a forest, a lot of times you can't really see everything that's going on. You just kind of see there's a couple that really stand out. A couple little trees, maybe one more here. And then I'm going to do that same thing where I kind of soften down. I'm trying not to go too much into where that little road that I made was. Softening down. And then I can do a couple here too. Maybe one is quite a bit taller. Just tapping and moving the brush down and getting a little wider as I move down. Yes, we're adding some happy little trees. Bob Ross vibes, that's very nice. I don't feel like I could ever truly be Bob Ross. Nobody can. Okay, so this one, I'm going to treat this more like this one is kind of a sadder tree. It doesn't have as much going on. Maybe it's a baby. Maybe it's just struggling a little more. And let's put another one here. And again, I'm going to soften down. If you want to kind of build up this bank here to really kind of emphasize that there is that road, we can add in some darker colors. You could even just add in a little texture. And let's go back in and add in just a little bit more there. Okay, I'm liking how this one is looking so far. I think it just is going to need a little bit more. Man, on the screen, it looks way more dark than it actually is in person. That's interesting. When did I make the road? I did that a couple steps ago. I just kind of lifted some out. If you've got all your water down here and is covered, just literally take your brush, drag, and lift some of that pigment out, and then you can make that little road. I'm so glad you guys are learning so much. That is, you make my whole day when I find that out, because that's my whole goal, is to help. Yes, that's where we set that vanishing point right there. Okay, so now we're moving on to this one while we let that dry so that we can add some pen details in at the very end. Very different composition here, because this is the one where we're going to be having the vanishing point right in the center. It's like we're laying and looking up at those trees. We mixed up a super dark green color. You could use black, you could use blue, whatever colors you want. You just want a really saturated one. Our vanishing point is here, so we don't want any of them to necessarily touch in the center. You want to think of a little like buffer zone, like if you put your fingerprint there, you don't want any of them to quite touch it, because we're imagining we're laying down. And if you're laying down, there's not going to be anything directly above your eyesight, because you'd have to be laying on it or under it in order for that to be the case. So we want them all to kind of almost kiss the very center, and then they're going to get bigger. That's why we want to practice that stroke. Take a second on another piece of paper to fill your brush up with enough to where you're going to be able to drag this a ways, but not too much that you can't get that thin tip. And let me actually place this down, because it's harder to do this when you're holding it. But you just want to take the very tip of the brush, and we want to barely touch, and then as we move, we're going to push a little harder and a little harder. See, I ran out of some pigment there, so I need to put a little more in, even a little more. They don't need to be perfect, but the idea is, in order to kind of give us a framework of how those trunks are going to be, practice that just a little bit. My road is a lake and your lights are a volcano. I gotta be honest, your paintings sound more exciting than mine. Yes, I hope you feel better. Okay, so let's practice, and let's start one that goes from the corner. So this one's pretty easy to do. If you really struggle with perspective, what you would want to kind of do is find the center point for this. I'm gonna eyeball it and say it's here, you know? But then you would want to, anytime you are making a tree, you want it to completely intersect the center. So any line needs to cross from one edge to the other and go right through the center. They don't need to be exactly perfect, it's fine, but just keep that in mind. I'm gonna go from this edge here, and I'm going to end here. Now, I know I've got a little bit too much in the tip to get a really nice thin line. We don't want it to quite touch the center. We want them to almost kiss it, but not quite. And we're going to very lightly drag. We want to barely touch there. And then let's make it bigger as we go out. And that's kind of our guide to kind of tell us, okay, so if the trunk looks like this, then we really need to kind of push the outside parts out here. I'm going to refill my brush, and at the very top, you're just going to put a couple dots, and then we're just going to kind of scribble. As we go down, you want it to be a little more sparse at the top, and then you really want to scribble down and get much larger as you go downward. Just kind of scribble and tap with the brush. Really push this bottom part out, because as it gets closer to you, it's going to get bigger and bigger. And you can kind of come in and tap a little more color into there if you need to. Now, for those of you who have motion sickness, I am going to be moving the phone down a little bit closer in a slightly different angle, so you've got a better chance of actually seeing this happen. Again, So if you have motion sickness and don't want to be jostled, look away right now, and then in 3, 2, and 1, we're going to move downwards. Okay. All right, we are reset with the phone now. And now I'm just going to, rather than trying to paint like this, I'm going to move my composition so that the angle is going to be more comfortable for my hand. This is a super dark green or gray type color. Whichever you want, go ahead and do that now. So again, I don't want them to quite touch, but we're going to get larger as we go down. Oops, I already had paint in there. So start with it really thin and then make it larger. Give ourselves a little framework for how much larger the trunk gets. Tap a couple times up here. Get larger while we're tapping and kind of scribbling. Add in a little bit more. And make sure it gets quite a bit bigger, right kind of on the edges. See how we're covering up a lot of that extra part? Yes, thank you. Phthalo blue, green, and then red. Time check. Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. All right. We are running out of time. I'm going to kind of move through some of these. The other thing you can do, let's add in another one here where we get almost to the center, but not quite. And tap. And tap. Getting bigger as we go down. Now, not every single tree is going to kind of meet and kiss the actual middle part. You can paint it that way. That's totally fine. But let's say you wanted to say like, oh, there's a little scraggly tree here. Maybe it doesn't come up quite as close. Maybe you wanted to just kind of hint that it's smaller and a little further away. Change the spacing a little bit. Sometimes throwing in a couple of those is going to help. I'm going to keep twisting as I do this. And I do think, I know we're like 5 minutes past what I said this was technically scheduled at, but I think we'll be able to finish this up in the next 5 or 10 minutes. So if you feel like sticking around, I'm going to try to finish both of these off. Because on that other one, all we really need to do is we're going to add in some of those pen details. So if you were looking forward to seeing that. I'm just flipping as I go. They don't have to completely mirror each other. You just want to remember when you want to cut that line that would go straight through the middle. And trees are all a little different, so they don't all need to kind of be the same shapes. I'm just kind of tapping and scribbling a little bit. Maybe there's a little one here. And twist. Keep in mind, you can kind of hide certain areas if you need to. If we don't want too much of that glow down here, I can actually cover most of that with the bottom of this tree. I definitely need another one here. And I feel like a little straggler one over there, maybe. We're exaggerating how thick the bottoms are because of that perspective. They pretty much look like Christmas trees, except for they just have a slightly more exaggerated descent into the bottom. I think this one needs just like a little scraggle tree over here. Okay. Now I'm going to move the camera back up. So again, if you get any sort of like motion sickness from that, look away now. And then in 3, 2, 1. You guys are so sweet. That would be really cool. I don't think I've ever made it to 15,000 likes. All right. Picking it up, I'm really liking how these are looking. This one I do think could just use that extra pen. Mine is dry, so I can use a pen. In watercolor, if you are using pens, keep in mind that if you're going to paint over them, they have to be waterproof, and some of them even require you to wait overnight. I love pen and watercolor together. However, I am really impatient when it comes to a lot of this stuff. And also, sometimes those waterproof pens and things are more expensive. So what I actually like to do when I incorporate pen into things is I wait for things to be dry, and then I can use any pen. It doesn't matter. This is just a Papermate Flare felt tip pen, and I can add in my details with that. Your 3-year-old's making hearts. Oh. Holy moly, you guys got me to 17,000. That's incredible. Thank you guys. That's cool. All right, so let's add in some trees here. It's a very similar thing here. You don't have to add in these if you don't want to, but I just kind of want to show you what they look like. I start my trees. If you've done any of my other tutorials, you've probably seen me do this, but I just start with a line. I tap that brush at the top. And we do want this to be a little thicker. And then I just squiggle. And like the best way I can describe how I draw trees is instead of squiggling like this, it's almost like I am writing cursive on top of each other. There's all sorts of swoops and loops and then sharp lines and things like that. Blending colors on the paper. Do I have any tips for that? Practice is really important. And figuring out, play with how wet your paper is, because you're going to see that at different wetnesses of your paper, you're going to have different effects. All right, so this pen is actually pretty small for this. Usually I actually work with those when it's smaller. I'm actually just going to grab a Sharpie to kind of put on top, and that's going to give me some bigger strokes as I move down. And you could add as many little trees as you want, but maybe even just that one is going to kind of help give us that extra dimension. We could add in more, or we could leave it like that. I kind of like the one right now. All right, since we're really close to time, I'm gonna leave it there. Let's take this tape off so that we can see what this looks like together. Because I always think when you take, like, that's one of the reasons why I like to tape off, because I feel like I get like 10% extra credit when I take the tape off. Because they actually kind of look like little, you know, individual paintings, and they just look a little more polished. So I put the long videos on YouTube. Yes, I have, and my username is the same across all the different channels. It's Rebel Unicorn Crafts. I do post some of the reels and stuff over on Instagram as well. All right. Yes, this one is my favorite for sure. I like this one. It feels a little more psychedelic though. Well, I hope that you guys had a ton of fun. And oh my goodness, you guys got me to 20. Well, I hope that you guys had a ton of fun. And oh my goodness, you guys got me to 23,000 likes. You guys are incredible. I really appreciate you spending your day with me. And I hope this was a nice little reprieve from the craziness that everything is. And I will, what do you guys think about for next week? Would you like me next week to go through and just swatch any of the palettes that I have and maybe some of the papers so that you guys can see how different things move, so that if you are in the market for buying something, you can kind of see it before you do it? Oh my goodness, you guys are incredible. 25. Okay, that will be really fun. That's really fun for me too, because I was kind of wondering if I was going to take a break next week. I like this idea. Sometimes swatching and stuff like that it's just more fun for me. I kind of get to play, and then ideally it also teaches you guys something. So next week, we're going to be swatching colors of different palettes, and I can just show you any supplies that you guys want to see that I might have. And if I really have my stuff together, I might on my blog tell you what I have available, so that if you want to do a little pre-research, I should be able to do that. You can kind of make requests and things like that. I start at 11 a.m. Mountain Time, so I'm not sure what that is in Europe. I think that's in the evening. Oh yes, absolutely. We can show the reference photos so that you can see, because that was one thing we were doing today, was we were seeing the differences between the paper. Don't judge the vibrancy here, because this one does have multiple layers of that color, but this one's a little smooth. Part of that is just because it's a lighter color, so it's easier, but part of that is also that paper. And then let's take a look at the Aurora versus this one. So this was in the cotton paper, and this was on the cellulose paper. So notice how much smoother this is, which is beautiful, but man, you really miss some of those really neat textures. They're really hard to get on that paper. And just so you guys know, if you're struggling with the time zones, I typically actually schedule a live event. If you go to my page, and sometimes I'm a little bit late on this, but if you go to my page a day or two before class, there's almost always an event actually scheduled that you can register for, and then it will add it to your calendar in the correct time for you. Oh my goodness, whoever has just really bumped up those likes, I just want to say thank you guys. You guys are it's lovely. I really appreciate it. I'm gonna head out for the day. I hope that you guys had fun. If you want to tag me in a video or something showing me what you painted today, I love seeing it. And I hope that you guys have fun, and I will be posting some more videos about some stuff soon. So thank you so much to everybody who sent likes and just painted or whatever. I appreciate you guys. I appreciate you spending the time with me, and I will see you guys next week.